Welcome back to Today on Bay TV. I'm Rachel Hopkins and we're joined by the Archbishop John Davies, Archbishop of Wales, as well as Wales's foremost journalists Robert Llewelyn-Jones and Spencer Feeney. So we've just had a look at the papers and we were talking about, of course, the mums in prison because you've done...
well, I spent some years as a criminal lawyer.
Yes.
Yeah.
People might be quite surprised to hear that. So you've got, quite a lot of...
Form.
Yeah.
I mean, in relation to this particular issue, people who finish up in prison, clearly they are there for good reason, to be punished. But that does not mean to say that you put them on the scrap heap. It does not mean to say that you then also, through creating other difficulties, punish their families. One of the primary purposes of prison is to rehabilitate people.
Which is the most important part.
Yeah, and creating huge difficulties that disrupt their family. I suppose there will be some people who say they deserve it. Well, I don't subscribe to that view at all. You try to put things back together, and in such a way that when people are released from prison, that perhaps in some way they have a different perspective on life. But I mean, I represented countless people whose pathway was as a consequence of social disadvantage, educational disadvantage, etc., sometimes social deprivation. Now, there'll be some people perhaps listening to this who say, oh, you're just making excuses for bad behaviour. One has to be realistic about why people finish up in that situation, and one has to be, quite frankly, charitable and say you really ought to be doing things that try to help them understand better their role in society and rehabilitate themselves into that society.
Take a Christian view.
I think take a humanitarian view, right, quite frankly.
Right.
And you talk about depraved circumstances, so...
Deprived, not depraved.
Depraved on the account that they are deprived.
Yeah, well...
But do you think possibly sort of doing more for the children in these areas would help prevent possibly the crimes of the future?
I mean, I guess families will be stigmatised, mother or father in prison. Yeah, I mean, I suppose you can help the children understand that mum or dad are there because they've done something wrong, and it may be a means of helping them become more responsible themselves as they're growing. I don't know whether...
I remember I was asked when I was still editor of the Post to speak at a school, a junior school in one of the more deprived areas of Swansea. And I don't know how it came about, but I ended up asking them to put their hands up if they had a family member who was in prison. Right. 3/4 of the class put their hands up.
Goodness.
And it was an object lesson in this, that it's very hard for some people coming from the backgrounds they come from.
Oh, yeah.
To,
I mean, the one object lesson is to actually sensibly look at your typical prison inmate in terms of their background. A huge percentage of them have a diagnosable psychological illness. And, if you're locking people up in a little room for 23 hours a day, I don't think that's helping their mental well-being or their physical well-being.
Do you think it's a role of the church to be involved in these social issues?
Well, prisons are required by law to have chaplaincy. Yes. And I guess that if I mention the Bible, at the end or towards the end of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 25, I'll give you the chapter, when I was in prison, you visited me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. No, so it's there. It's part of the gospel value.
Because, of course, the church sometimes gets criticised, isn't it, by politicians for straying into what they regarded as not areas for the church.
Well, I've always maintained, you see, you got me going now, that there's no better political manifesto than the Sermon on the Mount. There's no better political aim than trying to deliver to people life in all its fullness, and that's a direct quote from the Gospel according to St. John. So the church has not only the right to say these things, I think the church has a duty to say these things on behalf of society as a whole.
The tragedy is perhaps that people now don't go to church as we knew it in the past.
Are there more people going to church these days?
Oh, less.
Less again.
Did you see that survey last week?
Social attitudes.
It's the first time for many, many years, more than 50% in the survey said they didn't belong to a religion. But of course, that's different from saying that I don't believe in something.
Why do you think that less and less people are following a religion? Because surely any sort of faith in this day and age is a good thing.
It may be what we deliver. Maybe we are not ourselves the best adverts for it. Maybe we are perceived as an institution that's out of step with society in some ways. I don't know. I think if we can be better at actually making clear what lies at the heart of the Christian faith.
Isn't there a parental involvement in this? You were brought up, you were brought up by your parents to go to church, and people brought up to go to chapel. And then suddenly this void comes.
Yeah, but I'm not convinced this isn't an age of faith. I think it's just it's not an age of religion. And I think it's the word religion that has a problem. And that maybe it's partly, I think, to do with the way religions have been in the news for various things, you know.
The wrong reasons.
In the Anglican and Catholic Church, you've had issues with sexual abuse. Obviously, with Islam, there's been issues with Islamic terrorism. You now see in Burma fundamentalist Buddhists, ethnic cleansing against Muslims. So I think the word religion has itself become a barrier. But I'm not convinced that people do no longer believe that there is something else.
Religion and ideology can very often be.
Yes. There's an old joke, but a Jehovah's Witness knocks on a middle-aged couple's door and says to them, "Do you believe in God?" And they say, "Oh no, we're COV." Do you believe in God?
This reminds me of an old Prime Minister programme. I don't know whether you remember this, when they were appointing a bishop for some diocese, and Sir Humphrey, Nigel Hawthorne, that wonderful actor, saying, he believes in God. We don't want any of that.
Exactly. Yeah. But would you say you believed in God?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. But what do you mean by that? You know?
My understanding of God is the God made visible in the person of Jesus.
I think
the human face of the dead.
Yeah. And do you think the majority of Christians or people in Britain, COV or Church in Wales, would see it like that, or do you think there's a shift in? Well,
I can remember
faith?
being in a particular parish and saying to people, if someone stopped you on the way home from church this morning and said, "Where have you been?" and you said, "Well, why have you been there?" How would you answer it? And we went all round the houses. You know, I meet my friends. I've always gone. I was brought up to go. There was very little articulation of what you call belief. But eventually we got there. And with a bit of probing, they said, "Well, yes, I suppose I do believe in that." Yeah.
Yes, and I still think that's there. Yeah. Interesting. I've just read a book by Tony Adams, the ex-Arsenal and England football captain. Yeah. It's a book he's talking about. He's been sober for 20 years. He's now a recovering alcoholic.
Rehabilitation, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. But until I read this book, I didn't realise how closely Alcoholics Anonymous as a movement correlates with religion. They have their 12 steps, commandments. They have a big book. But the key thing is that it says you have to subjugate your will to a higher power, capital H, capital P. And I thought, this is so similar to what most of us would see as formal religions. And all through it, Tony Adams is talking about how by putting his faith in this higher power, that's what's allowed him for 20 years to be sober. So I think there is faith. But is there a religion? I think the two things are. I think they run aside, but
they'd be quite different.
Yeah.
Well, St. John's Church in Cardiff, I still find a certain solace, you know, in going in when you're passing through the haze, to call in there for 5 minutes, sit down, little contemplation, a great comfort.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I'm not a religious person, but I was in Ilston last Thursday, and I went into St. Ilston's Church, and the same kind of thing.
Glorious little building.
Quiet, sat there for 5 minutes.
And that, I think, you see, you've put your finger on it by differentiating between, if you like, religion and faith. You can sense faith in a place like that, as you can in the hustle and bustle of the city centre in Cardiff. You go in. Whereas in terms of religion, it's timetable. This is when you go. This is when you do. This is when you do the biz, if I can put it like that. Yeah. But actually, it's very often the quiet moments. Without anything going on, where you're rooted in something far deeper.